In 1934, the first motion picture production chairman, William Hayes, implemented the Hays Code, banning certain topics from being shown in Hollywood films. The code was enforced after many Hollywood scandals, leading many to question the content they were consuming. The code was in direct violation of the right to free speech, but at the time, movies were not protected by the First Amendment, ruled by a 1915 court case. While the code eventually fell, such heavy censorship greatly affected the content of films at its time, Hollywood itself, and the tropes we see in modern films. The 1920s brought changes in both attitude and technology. The Roaring Twenties were in full swing, bringing a cultural shift for Western countries. With the new decade came a new level of societal freedom, from heavily modest clothes of the 1800s to short dresses and the revolutionary flapper girls and a rise of jazz clubs. The film industry was no exception. Hollywood was at a new high, wrapping up the decade with the implementation of sound films. But with growing popularity came controversies happening both on and off screen. Not everyone was in support of a newfound sexual freedom, especially for women. This being portrayed was considered a moral failing of the industry. Films considered risque caused uproar from more conservative audiences. This cost 7 states, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Maryland, Kansas, New York, and Virginia, to establish censorship boards. This was an issue as it took power away from Hollywood executives. A string of behind-the-scenes controversies only added fuel to the fire. After the death of a young actress, Virginia Rapp, who was found dead shortly after a party, an autopsy showed the cause of death was a ruptured bladder, peritonitis, and inflammation of the layer of tissue inside the abdomen. Rumors had sparked that she was raped by infamous actor and comedian Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle. He was eventually charged with manslaughter. While over the years, many opinions and conclusions have been made about the true cause of Rapp's death, this was the end of Arbuckle's career. This was a massive scandal at the time and validated many spheres of Hollywood's belief in purity. With the 1922 murder of director William Desmond Taylor and 1923 overdose of actor Wallace Reed, the backlash towards the industry as a whole had grown, and a power was slipping from Hollywood executives. A solution was needed. In 1922, a group of studio heads from the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America, MPPDA, putting William Hayes, a Republican political operative, at the head of the team. They were tasked with giving a better and more family-friendly face to the entire industry. The MPPDA was tied directly to Hayes' name, coming to be known as the Hayes Office. It was decided they would have a set of guidelines. In these efforts, a 1927 document, Don'ts and Be Carefuls, this original script had little effect, falling on deaf ears of the industry's critics. So in 1929, 2 critics, prominent trade publisher and devout Roman Catholic Martin J. Quigley, and Jesuit priest and writer Daniel A. Lord, came forward with a draft of their own. The draft was turned into Hayes, who after small revisions published the new guidelines in 1930, which would become known as the Hayes Code. Even though an official code was published, it didn't change much in the industry, both in the content being produced and the criticisms from conservative viewers. This all came to a head in 1934 when a group of Roman Catholic prelates created their own rating system and began calling for boycotts. This drew audiences away, and with studios' economics already fragile from the Great Depression, Hayes stepped in to fully enforce the code and would have a grip on the film industry until its demise in 1968. Nowadays, movies have a rating system based on the content, allowing movies targeted towards older audiences to be more mature. But at the time, the Hays Code was held over all films, detailing several rules that movies must follow. But what were the rules exactly? The code was split into 2 sections, Don'ts and Be Carefuls. The Don'ts covered content explicitly banned. This included several things. Notably, suggestive nudity in fact or silhouette, sex perversion, homosexuality, white slavery, miscegenation, sexual relations between different races, or ridicule of the clergy, along with many more. The Be Carefuls, while not outright banned from the screen, were subjects placed under watch, and allowability was case by case. A few of these rules were the use of firearms, men and women in bed together, and the use of drugs. These are just the written bullet points for specific rules. The code is 19 pages, but was summarized into 3 key points. 1. No picture shall be produced which will lower the moral standards of those who see it. Hence, the sympathy of the audience shall never be thrown to the side of crime, wrongdoing, evil, or sin. 2. Correct standards of life, subject only to the requirements of drama and entertainment, shall be presented. 3. Law, natural or human, shall not be ridiculed, nor shall sympathy be created for its violation. The code had arguably the largest effect on LGBT content. In causing harm to many communities, the censorship of queer media took the forefront in both the code and the historical discussions surrounding this topic. This is particularly due to the cultural taboos around sex. In the code, a good amount of the don'ts revolve around it, and in these discussions, both women who were not viewed as sexual beings apart from their husbands, and LGBT people who took the front of the censorship. And of course, queerness was still shown in certain ways. A clause in the code allowing things to be shown as long as they were in a negative light. In the Hayes era, more explicitly LGBT people were almost always seen as older men or women preying on the innocence of younger people. A villain, or ending up dead, is a sort of punishment. But you can't just remove an entire group from the screen. Directors had to get creative to circumvent these rules. Alfred Hitchcock was a famous director of this era, having made many notable films, such as Notorious and Rope, that managed to keep in certain topics despite the Hays Code. This era of film led to the emergence of queer coding, the practice of implying a character's sexual orientation without directly showing it on screen, therefore abiding by censorship. Queer coding is not always positive, mainly hinging on stereotypes to convey its message. Villains are a common portrayal of this trope, not usually meant for representation, but humor, hinging on stereotypes of queer people to entertain heterosexual audiences. We can't talk about the censorship of this era without talking about its roots in Catholic beliefs. Those pushing the code believed they had a responsibility to protect the American family from impurity, leaning heavily into views on sexual abstinence and strict morality. This could make films at the time seem flat. When everything always has to be black and white, it takes away from the interest of the movie. Black and white morality leads to black and white plot lines. The differences could be extreme. These clips compare Betty Boop's original design to a version in ordinance with the code. This shot from 1903, the Great Train Robbery, would be a violation only 3 decades later. Not everyone was up for these changes. The code faced protests, including 1940 photography Thou Shalt Not from Whitney Schaffer, directly violating the code, with the clashing of moral responsibility, while the Catholic Church believed in protecting the American family, who was part of this all-American dream. In 1952, the code took a major hit when the U.S. reversed a 1950 Supreme Court case's ruling that determined that motion pictures were not covered under speech and subject to First Amendment protections was overruled. The code was revised and shortened in 1956, but wasn't removed completely until 1968. The code had come in with large social political change and left the same way. The 60s brought the sexual revolution with the introduction of the pill and research into sexual trends, with the rise of young women exploring a newfound sexual autonomy and erotica finding its place in mainstream media. The strict puritanical views harbored by the Hays Code were losing both relevance and grip in society. The Hays Code censorship of film began to clash with other forms of media. In the 60s, erotica was on a rise, both written and in pornographic videos. The decade prior, in 1953, Playboy was founded, and they opened their first official Playboy Club in 1960. In the United States, sex has always been a taboo. The sexual revolution challenged a construct built heavily into Western society. The Hays Code was a system stuck in a world meant to hide and shave down parts of people. Media plays a huge role in society. The way we think and communicate can affect people's views on right versus wrong. Movies are a large chunk, especially pre-social media, when entire industry is saying certain groups are wrong and immoral, and that difference is perversion. People will listen, but times were changing, information becoming more accessible, and with the rise of mainstream pornography, leading people to view sexuality with less stigma, and the LGBT rights movement in full swing, the Hays Code was outdated and fully removed in 1968. The effects would continue into modern day. The code may be history, but it shaped tropes and representation for years to come and cemented itself into Hollywood history and the film industry as a whole.